Hello and welcome to this week's Shoot the Moon podcast, broadcasting live and direct from Revenue Rocket World Headquarters in Bloomington, Minnesota. As you know, if you tune in regularly, Revenue Rocket is and are the M&A people. We focus on M&A and the IT services market. With me today are my partners, Alan Lockhart and Ryan Barnett. Welcome, guys.
And great to be here from beautiful, sunny Minnesota. It is absolutely gorgeous. A lot of people are like, doesn't it snow all year long? And it is like 77 and sunny, low humidity. It's gorgeous here. And we have a gorgeous topic today, Ryan. What's going on?
Oh, absolutely. And Mike and Matt, we always talk about things that we see within the week. And when reflecting upon kind of the last week, it had an interesting thing. And maybe this isn't as interesting as it is probable, in that a ton of conversations revolved around a vertical market focus and why it matters in M&A. And an interesting topic, considering this is something that Revenue Rocket, we've been preaching for, Mike, I don't know how long you've talked about vertical markets, but it's been as long as I can remember, that in order for a company to be extremely successful in execution, you have to specialize, really focus in on a technology area, be really good at it. You have to verticalize, and you have to pick a specialty and then be really good in one market and then productize those offerings. So to hear a lot of conversations this week were really about PE firms that were looking for vertical market expertise, as well as strategic companies that are looking to pick one market and kind of bet everything on it. I just thought it was interesting, and I wanted to discuss that with you both today on why that matters in M&A and what kind of things should firms be looking at when picking a vertical market strategy and going to their target customer base. Why does that make them effective in their go-to-market execution, but also what makes them great M&A targets? And if you're a seller, or you're potentially looking at selling your business and you have a vertical market approach, what I want you to get out of this podcast is how do you double down on that? How do you position yourself better for an exit? And how do you align with buyers who are looking for very vertical market expertise? So, Mike, why don't you get us started? Why does vertical market matter so much in M&A right now?
Yeah, great question, Ryan. I think it's because it's not just about EBITDA anymore. I think in order to take the beachhead, use what metaphor you want, to really win, if you're going to acquire a company, you want to be in a position where the company you're acquiring has a leadership position in some market, and through that leadership position, they have eliminated a lot of the noise and competition in their marketplace. And hopefully you can appreciate that's a business case to verticalize anyway, even if you're going to grow organically. But from an acquisition perspective, I think the market has really gotten much more specialized in saying, hey, we know these kinds of firms tend to have faster growth, which is factual, than more generalist firms. They tend to be more profitable, which is also a fact, than more generalist firms. And as a result, just based on the metrics, they're much more attractive to us as investors, right? We like faster growth. We like more profitability. Gives us more room to operate, ultimately gives us an opportunity to further scale, and help them move into a number one or number two market position in that vertical with their technology. Now, maybe they're not quite there. Maybe they're not quite to number one or number two, or maybe they are, and they're continuing to expand further into that market. Or maybe in the M&A world, someone says, I really need an adjacency in the same vertical market so we can take and cross-sell and upsell customer base, which is certainly a lot easier than finding greenfield customers. And I could probably give you another, 20 reasons why I think the M&A market is kind of coming along to say, hey, we really need, people that specialize in tech and overlay a vertical market. And that intersection is finite to the point where they can really, really grow into that market and take share. And as a result, continue their trajectory on being fast growth and high profit.
Yeah, that's I think a great way to get us started. And you started out by by saying, hey, it's are buyers really buying EBITDA today? Are they starting to buy industry specific customers? And where does that there's a big benefit in doing that. If I just define, just kind of keep with some of the definitions, and Matt, you've worked with a lot of companies that have had some of these vertical market focuses. I'm kind of curious, what level have you started to see of specificity? I'll give an example. One of the quotes that we heard this week was that someone was, hey, I'm not just focused on healthcare, I'm focused on ambulatory healthcare. And I'm curious, why is that level of discipline just so powerful in a deal when you start to look at these markets or even sub-markets of execution?
Yeah, I mean, so as we think about verticalization across the scale, right? I mean, you could apply a sort of simplistic method towards verticalization, say for example, by just having a very focused marketing uh, approach to a particular market, right? Then you can sort of go from there to say, okay, well, not only am I going to market specifically to that particular vertical, but I'm also going to sell specifically in a way, and I'm going to have expertise of sales across that. And then you move into sort of your operational delivery capability. And that's where you start to see firms getting more specific. And ultimately, when you think about the value equation that a services firm can provide, well, as they increase both their specificity, but then also with that specificity, increasing their knowledge and their expertise, right, related to that vertical, well, they are more valuable providers. They are stickier with their customers. They know their customers' problems, even if the customers don't know their own problems. They are just experts. And you say, okay, well, we're experts in healthcare IT, and you're like, okay. So, where in healthcare IT are you experts? Are you experts in ambulatory? Are you experts in clinical patient care? Are you experts in? And so, for most firms, or for many firms, they obviously can't apply that deep, deep, deep level of expertise across the entire industry of healthcare IT. Even the biggest of the big struggle to do that because that's a pretty broad area, right? And so, and that doesn't mean that you can't market to a broader area, but as you pick and choose where you are going to elevate yourself in that vertical progression, having some specificity really can matter.
In getting that specificity, I think a lot of firms really are challenged to get there. And I think one thing, Mike, we've certainly heard a lot is I I'm unwilling to bet the farm on one vertical. And I'm curious, Mike, why are firms hesitant to pick a vertical market strategy? Even though PE firms and strategics are willing to really invest in firms that have deep expertise, what's difficult about letting go in the reins of selling to everyone, and why do few firms make this transition to have this vertical market focus?
Well, there's a lot of fear that governs that decision, Ryan, and I think part of that is, their concern that whatever market they might choose might have a major recession or depression that would confine spending to a point where it would put their business at risk. That's a story we hear all the time. Hey, we don't want to have any quote unquote customer concentration if we can avoid it, but we don't have market concentration because if any one of these markets should go south, we could be at risk, right? I think what typically happens and what we've learned over time is actually just the opposite happens during a drought or a time in a market that the market's tending to pull back or have any tumult in it and be, maybe uncertain. The buyers in those markets tend to seek out those vertical specialists more aggressively than less so because they don't want to take risk of failure with their limited investments with a generalist. They tend to want to de-risk. They tend to want to try to look for a better deal or a more certain relationship. They don't just stop spending because in many of these areas in tech, pick your poison of the kind of tech firm you run, it's very challenging for firms to quote unquote stop spending on your service, whether you're involved with infrastructure managed service companies or digital transformation enterprises and AI or implementing business systems of some sort. Very, very challenging for companies to just up and stop spending, and especially in a vertical market where they want to have a lower risk partner. We've actually seen firms get more business during those sort of recessive times in the market. So the reality of it is that doesn't really hold up. It is oftentimes an excuse that we hear, but it doesn't really hold up in practice based on what we've seen over the last 25 years or so for firms that have committed to vertical markets. And again, I think this is something that the capital markets know, right? They know that if there's a tumultuous time in a particular market, it's likely that firms in that market that are end customers are going to double down to look for a specialist, maybe move their business to a more certain offering, one that may even be more optimized to their specific needs. As a result, provide a cost savings, which would be the driver for any potential change anyhow.
If you look at the operational expertise and the target market focus that these firms get by going into a market, I'm curious, Matt, if investors are really looking and kind of doubling down on those markets. However, if you think about this as a target market board, and you've got your center of the bullseye might be in a vertical market that has the intersection of a specialty, and both of those are very, very narrow. The number of targets that might hit that starts to really shrink. Now, I'm curious, Matt, when you start to work with buyers in this space, how are you coaching firms to look at this intersection of technology and vertical market? So there's enough firms that you can go after to make it a successful process, but it's still specific enough that you're able to really still double down on your thesis. Is that a matter of looking at more service lines or perhaps broadening the client base, for example, from enterprise customers to maybe mid-sized customers? And Matt, how do you think about how buyers should start to think about when this limited quantity of firms that might hit that niche and vertical market?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you bring up a couple of good points, right? It's not just about, one specific submarket, in thinking about an adjacency strategy, there can be multiple submarkets that could be adjacent to an opportunity. An example, this customer that we worked with had a strong presence in sort of general practice healthcare managed services. So, patient clinic environments, et cetera, et cetera. And they saw that the sort of the issues related to that particular vertical extended into the dental practice market, right? The DSO practice. And so while their initial thesis was to, really build upon that sort of patient clinic environment, what they found was that they could extend their, sort of their sub-market focus, still all fits very well in a, practice clinic environment, patient care, operational expertise within that, and so they were able to relatively quickly broaden out the target list. Now, that didn't mean that they didn't still want to find opportunities within sort of that traditional healthcare patient clinic environment, but they just expanded their market into the dental practice DSO market. So I think that's one method that you can look at. I think that to your point earlier, you get the opportunity to look at adjacent capabilities. You could look at the target market focus. You could simply look at the geographic target market focus. And so, there's a variety of means that can fit within the overall thesis and still keep you tight enough within a vertical practice, and yet expand your overall target list, which is absolutely key. One of the things that we advise on all the time is having the appropriate level of flexibility to be able to win in an inorganic growth strategy, and that applies certainly even when you've got a vertical focus.
It's a great discussion so far here, guys. I agree with kind of everything you're saying. Yeah, I'd love to take a slightly different look. And Mike, we hear this all the time, and I think you addressed it somewhat. But what's the risk when someone says, we just serve everyone? So the target market is out there, and we're going to be able to provide services to them. What's the risk? Kind of two-part question. One, what's the risk to that? But two, what can a potential seller of an IT services firm, what can they do to start becoming vertically market focused if they're not focused here today?
Well, I'll take the second question first, Ryan, and then go back to the first last. But to start, you usually have some sort of concentration in your business if you approach a market like a generalist. If you look and do a customer analysis, you'll find that you probably have 20%, 30%, maybe more of your customers that are kind of lookalikes, right? They may be in the same vertical market. They have similar attributes. You're doing similar things for them. And you're probably saying to yourself when you work with them, boy, I really like working with fill in the blank, accounting firms, dental offices, healthcare clinics, manufacturers, whatever it is. You see eye to eye with them. They appreciate your service. There's good, what I'll call product market fit, where you have a good fit for your services in there. And that's probably a clue of where you should focus your business. Almost every firm I've ever looked at in a 40-year career has some level of concentration in some market or markets. It may be 2-3 markets where you go, yeah, I really like all 3 of these markets, but I enjoy this market the best. Fill in the blank of where you could see yourself focusing your energy. You like those business owners or those leaders in that industry. You can see eye to eye with them. They generally value your service and your offering at a high level. They're easy to work with because maybe there's certain attributes of that industry that align really, really well to your offering. And that's probably a clue of where you need to go if you're going to verticalize and focus your energy. I don't generally recommend that you just pull a vertical out of the sky and say, hey, this could be really good. We don't really have experience in that market, but let's go chase that, because there's just enough unknowns that I think you don't need to learn the hard way. As they say, success leaves clues, and that success in your own customer base will probably point you where to go. As far as the perils go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Mike. I think that also sort of gives a clue into how you can progress into a vertical market. As I mentioned before, oftentimes you can very effectively start with a marketing, and we advise a marketing and sales program related to getting deeper into a vertical. And if you think in that agile mindset that every single time you're working with a customer and a new customer, you are getting smarter and deeper and building upon the foundation of operational experience as well as subject matter expertise. And so, it gives a path to convert a generalist business into a vertical expert business. It doesn't need to be done with a flip of the switch. And to your point, it's really hard, right? That's why you don't just say, hey, I want to be experts in the bird feeder manufacturing market, even though I don't really know much about bird feeders today. So I think that it really does give a path into it that is viable for any type of business and any size business.
Yeah, I would add that it's an evolution, not a revolution. I think unless you formed your business to say, hey, we're going to go focus on this market and this market exclusively, I think a question we get from a lot of clients about this transformation is, well, we don't want to start saying no to interested customers that we can service when they come to us. And as much as that is correct, you do want to evolve into a market. And what you'll find is with the momentum you gain in the market and the referrals that come from that market, and as you tailor your marketing, pretty soon you wake up and the lion's share, if not all your business, is in that market. And that happens over a period of years. It's not a transformation that happens overnight. To get back to the first question, Ryan, why is it not the right idea to service the broader market or anyone that you may be able to service? It's very, very challenging to scale your offering up and down to companies of different size and different markets because their needs are discrete enough that you find yourself customizing your solution, maybe not every time, but you certainly are customizing it a lot. And that kind of one-off customization, dialing in for every client, moves you into, I like to use the analogy of a tailor, like someone that makes a suit or a clothing manufacturer, right? You certainly can be a bespoke tailor and customize every solution, but that generally means that you have to charge a lot, and in a competitive market that might not be tenable. And you have to be in a position to tailor that solution to every client because their needs are different. Where if you align to, a certain baseline set of technologies and a vertical market, you can become a clothing manufacturer, and you're going to be able to produce lots of suits very similarly. That may need a little adjustment, but for the most part, service the lion's share of the need in that market. And that will allow you to raise volume and grow in a way, efficiently grow in a way that optimizes growth, again, back to as we opened up, and profit in ways that you can't as a generalist.
We see a lot of generalists in the MSP community specifically. And just for our audience, when we think about IT services firms, they often fall into kind of this managed service provider, cloud service provider space. Do a lot of work with channel partners. So if you're implementing an ERP solution, it seems like a lot of those people have done some vertical market focus. And some of the cloud specific, and somewhat, if you're doing private cloud, you're starting to see some very specific applications, but still some generalists there. And then custom application developers oftentimes will have some pretty deep expertise in some very particular markets. And I'm curious, when you start to think about buyers in this space, and you're adding in, hey, I really would love to buy an MSP, but most of them are generalized right now. And Mike, you mentioned it might take years in order to get from generalized to specific. Are companies that are targeting kind of let's say an MSP with vertical market focused, are those really unicorns out there and there's just a few? Or is this something that we're going to have to be a little bit patient as people start, as firms start to become and embrace these vertical markets, and this becomes somewhat just more clear? Because Mike or Matt, either one of you feel free to address that or jump in there.
Well, it's a fascinating question, Ryan, because my estimate is there's about a third of the market is verticalized now. It wasn't that case a few years ago, and this isn't a very scientific stat, but it's more. We're seeing more companies that are verticalized. Maybe it's a quarter of the market, but a quarter to a third of the market. We'll give ourselves a little grace here. Are verticalized, and the rest are kind of moving, I think, in that direction. Maybe they're verticalized already and don't even know it. They think of themselves as a generalist, but when you really look at your customer base, if 40% of your customers are in a vertical market, you're verticalized. You should be more committed to that market more effectively and granularly market, because you'll pick up, even more clients that and get more of that velocity for high growth and high profit than you might think. And so the answer is kind of yes and no. I think it's part of why the market, when a capital partner is looking at the market and they're really desirous of a vertical company, there's fewer of those, right? There's certainly more generalists available than verticalized companies. But the market has been trending to be more verticalized over probably the last 10 or more years. And that percentage of verticalized companies continues to go up every year. And so, that's kind of why the answer is yes and no, Ryan.
Another thing that, we see is there could be opportunities where, let's take that MSP firm that has some real expertise in any particular market, right? Healthcare, legal, whatever it may be. And yet they're not solely focused on that market. Well, a buyer can look at that and say, well, there's a certain percentage where it still makes sense, where there's still a good target. It still meets our thesis. It still meets our return rate if we're able to make this acquisition, and we're able to take their 40% of the business in that same vertical marketplace and be able to cross-sell and grow our basis. And you say, well, what do they do with the rest of it? Well, I mean, likely they're servicing other customers anyways outside of that vertical market. It's not a focus for them. The revenue is good. They could let the revenue trail off and then rationalize, yet it still meets the measure of a good acquisition. They could bring that in and then carve the firm apart and then sell off the part that they don't want. They could ask a firm if it's a carve-out possibility. So there's a lot of means, because to your point, Ryan, I mean, in that MSP market, for example, we know this. There are limited firms that are 100% focused on one particular vertical.
Right, absolutely. There are few firms that have that target market specificity, and I think that's why it was kind of goes to I've only got just a few more questions, but when you think about because of the specialization or the verticalization here, do buyers really need to start? They might often have to just look at their thesis differently, in that a carve out might be on board. You might have to look at companies that have already made acquisitions and carve out a portion of that. And so I'm curious on the feasibility of that. But also, I'm just to kind of wrap up this concept and podcast, and both of you, I'd love your opinion here. Mike and Matt, you've both mentioned that the companies that have vertical market focus are more likely to grow more quickly. And so oftentimes what we're seeing, it's not necessarily just recurring revenue today in today's deals. It starts to become organic growth, and vertical market starts to add that organic growth. It starts to become specialty and focus areas. So there is just that interest and expertise within those vertical markets that become valuable. And I guess I'm curious, when you start to look at deals that are in the space, and as a reminder to the audience, deals are typically valued at a very rough metric is a multiple of EBITDA is where you're going to be landing as where your company may be valued. Is there, if, what kind of uptick should a company expect in their valuation by having this vertical market focus? Like what kind of financial benefit when you're finally selling your company does this focus have? And Mike, Matt, I'll let either of you, whoever comes off mute first, can grab that question.
Well, I beat you to it, Mike. I feel like we're now playing a one of those TV games as to who gets it. Yes, it is absolutely there is absolutely an uptick. Now, how much, right? I mean, there's some dependencies. I mean, so as we look at things on a multiple of EBITDA, which is the gold standard, I think that sellers could sort of as a baseline think that there's one tick, right, or one addition to the EBITDA multiplier. So, for example, on a baseline, if you were an 8x multiple and you've got a good, strong vertical go-to-market capability, you could expect a 9x in that scenario, simply because you are that much more valuable. And the alignment of strategic goals, we know, is really what makes the most in driving that EBIT multiplier up. Now, it can be more than that, right? If you think about size and sort of overall percentage of market share within a sub vertical, if there is something that you have built that is recognized as a leading capability, leading product combination of both, in addition to having market share, you could see a much greater expansion. So at a baseline, at least one tick above, and that can go up to 4, 5, 6 ticks above a baseline valuation because of your vertical market expertise. And we see this. We've driven that level of multiple expansion with our clients who have that vertical go-to-market capability.
That's a great answer, Matt. I think when we look at this topic, and I would be remiss if we didn't say we have an entire growth strategy advisory arm that this is a big part of what we do. And so we've helped a lot of firms look at these target markets that they're going after. We've even had companies change their name to address the market they're going after. If this is something that you're looking at today and you're wondering how can I increase my sales and increase the rate of my sales and ultimately increase the valuation of my firm, this vertical market specialty is something you should do. And we've helped a lot of companies on this journey. If you're somewhere out there today that's thinking about this, please let us know, and let's talk and we'll kind of guide you through how we've helped other firms get through that. Little revenue rocket commercial there. Again, what I heard today: higher value, higher growth with vertical markets. PE firms, strategics alike, are both going to pay for that. We're starting to see specialties in these vertical markets that are pretty niche. As a side note, by the way, I think in the 5 or 6 times that we heard vertical markets talked about in just the last few days, we heard legal, we heard healthcare, we heard ambulatory, we heard dental, we heard construction. There was all over the place of where the vertical market could be. And that's what's fascinating to me. You can pick any vertical as long as you're able to, that is big enough for it to matter, but small enough for you to make your mark on it. And you can be the number 1 or 2 provider. People are really going to pay up for that. And so really consider those options. So love this topic, love this concept. Mike, Matt, you've been great on that. Matt, Mike, I'll turn it over to you for any last comments as we wrap it up.
No, thank you, Ryan, and great topic that you brought forward. To your point, Mike, when we worked together 20 years ago in a different capacity, you were advocating for my firm to move down that approach. we, like many, were slower than we should have been. Ultimately, we did get there. So this isn't new news, for us and for you, but it is not easy, and get some guidance along the way. So, Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Ryan, with that, we'll tie a ribbon on it for this week's Shoot the Moon podcast. Encourage you to tune in next week when we unpack other M&A topics of interest for the tech-enabled services market. Make it a great week. Thanks, and take care.